Welcome to Mr. Phantom, where fear hides in every shadow and chilling tales come to life. Before we start, make sure to subscribe and like this video to get a scary story every night. Imagine you're in a quiet, small town, far from the hustle and bustle, where every corner of a house holds untold stories. There is a house there, one that seems to be forgotten, a house that appears to have been overlooked by time itself. But like all forgotten tales, there are secrets hidden within, secrets waiting to unveil the darkness that has been kept away for so long. The house, with all its silence, has a voice, voices that many have never heard, voices that slowly beckon anyone brave enough to come closer. Tonight, we will follow the journey of Ethan, a young man who unknowingly gets swept into the dark story of a house filled with mysteries. He has no idea that the first step he takes toward that house will change everything. Amidst the shadows that haunt, behind the walls that never speak, there is a message from the past waiting to be revealed. Listen carefully. Let this story guide your mind to another world, a world where mystery and fear meet, but with a rhythm that soothes, inviting you to dive into the deep silence. And as always, before we begin, remember to keep your body relaxed, breathe deeply, and let this tale lead us into the embrace of a night full of secrets. Enjoy the story, and may sweet dreams accompany you after this tale comes to an end. My name is Ethan, and I had always been someone who craved new beginnings. After my last few years spent moving from city to city, from apartment to apartment, I finally found myself settling into a small, quiet town in the heart of America. It wasn't much, a few streetlights, houses scattered on wide plots of land, and an eerie sense of peace that clung to the place like a heavy fog. The town was like a sleeping giant, unaware of the darkness that occasionally stirred beneath its serene surface. Most of the locals had lived there for generations, their lives intertwined with the soil and the air in a way that felt ancient, almost primal. I, on the other hand, was an outsider, a new face among people who had already lived their lives in harmony with the place. I moved into a small house on the outskirts of town, far enough from the main street to feel the isolation I had grown accustomed to. The house was a modest two-story with a large front porch and a rusty white fence that had seen better days. There was something comforting about its worn-out charm, as if it was a relic from the past trying to hold on to its glory. I didn't mind the creaking floors or the slightly crooked roof. It was exactly what I needed after years of chaos. It was quiet, too quiet maybe. The neighborhood was small, and my house was nestled between two others, one belonging to a young couple and the other to an older man named Mr. Darius. Mr. Darius had lived in his house for as long as anyone could remember. In fact, the townsfolk had mentioned him in passing during casual conversations, but there was always an air of mystery around him. He was an older man, graying hair, sharp features, and eyes that seemed to pierce through everything they looked at. I could tell he had once been someone of stature, perhaps even influential in the town's earlier days. But now he was just another relic of history, tucked away in the shadow of his crumbling house. People didn't talk about him much, but they didn't avoid him either. He simply existed on the edge of town, a figure of curiosity, but never outright danger. His house was the oldest in the neighborhood. Its windows were covered with thick curtains, and the garden was overgrown with weeds and vines that seemed to want to consume the house whole. It was dark, always dark, especially at night. Unlike the other houses, which had lights shining through their windows, Mr. Darius's house remained dim, the only light coming from the occasional flicker of what I assumed were old lamps in the windows. I never saw him during the day, but I often caught glimpses of him at night, moving around the house in a slow, deliberate way. It wasn't just the way he walked, it was the way he seemed to always be in motion, even when everything else stood still. At first, I thought nothing of it. People get eccentric when they grow old, I told myself. Maybe he preferred the darkness, or maybe he just liked the quiet. After all, there wasn't much to do in a place like this, especially if you were on your own. I had no intention of getting too close to him, and he didn't seem to have any interest in me either. Our encounters were few and far between. Sometimes a nod when we crossed paths on the street, or an occasional wave if our eyes met in passing. He didn't seem unfriendly, just distant, as if he had lived a life that others could never fully understand. And that was fine by me. I was content to live my own life, tucked away in my little house, surrounded by the silence of the countryside. But that was before I started hearing things. It wasn't anything at first, just a strange sensation, a prickling feeling at the back of my neck when I walked past his house. A whisper of wind, perhaps, or a sound I couldn't quite place. There were nights when I could have sworn I heard something faint and unexplainable, like a creak or a low murmur. It was the kind of sound that made you look over your shoulder, but when you did, there was nothing there. No one, just the darkness and the eerie quiet that seemed to hang in the air like a heavy fog. One evening, after I'd spent a long day unpacking boxes and getting settled, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. It was just one of those perfect evenings, cool, with a light breeze rustling through the trees, and the sky a deep shade of purple as the sun dipped below the horizon. The moon was just beginning to rise, casting a pale, silver light over everything. As I walked past Mr. Darius's house, I felt that odd sensation again. It wasn't as if someone was watching me, but rather as though something was trying to reach out from the shadows, just out of sight. I shook my head, telling myself I was just imagining things. It was probably the isolation getting to me. The town had that effect. When you were alone for too long, your mind started playing tricks on you. But then I heard it. A soft sound, like a rustling, but it wasn't the wind. No, this was something different. I stopped in my tracks and turned to face the old house. There was a faint light flickering behind one of the windows, just enough to cast shadows on the curtains. It was barely visible, like someone was moving behind the glass. And then I heard it again, a low, almost imperceptible whisper. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but as I listened, the whisper grew louder. It wasn't clear, not at first, but there was something about it that was unnerving. The words felt like they were being pulled from somewhere deep, like they had been buried for years. I couldn't make them out, not exactly. But there was one thing I was certain of. The voice wasn't coming from Mr. Darius. It wasn't his voice. It wasn't even a human voice. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, but eventually the whisper stopped. The light in the window flickered and then went out. The air felt colder somehow, and I was left standing in the middle of the street, my heart pounding in my chest. I took a deep breath and tried to shake off the feeling, but something inside me nagged at me. That sound, that whisper, it wasn't just a figment of my imagination. There was something wrong in that house, something that shouldn't have been there. But what? I tried to forget about it. I really did. But the whisper kept haunting me, just on the edge of my mind. I didn't tell anyone about it, not even the young couple who lived a few houses down. I didn't want to seem paranoid or make a big deal out of something that could have easily been explained. Still, every time I walked past Mr. Darius's house, I felt that chill again. The whisper, the unease. I began to wonder about the old man, about what he was hiding, and whether he knew more about the strange noises than he let on. But I never asked. I didn't have to. The house itself told me everything I needed to know. Little did I know, that whisper was just the beginning of something much darker. The days started blending into each other. My routine became almost robotic. Wake up, unpack a few boxes, take a walk around the neighborhood, try to distract myself with small tasks that gave me a sense of purpose. But even in the peace of my quiet little house, there was a growing tension I couldn't escape. The whispering from Mr. Darius's house haunted my nights, and the shadows seemed to stretch further every evening, clawing at the edges of my perception. The unease was like a persistent itch that I couldn't scratch, an itch that gnawed away at my nerves until I couldn't ignore it any longer. It wasn't until one particularly restless evening that the full weight of it hit me. The whisper had grown louder, and now it wasn't confined to just my restless nights. I could hear it during the day, too. At first, it was just a faint rustling, like the sound of the wind stirring through dry leaves. But as the days passed, it became more distinct, more deliberate. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the house settling. The voice was unmistakable. It wasn't a human voice either, and it certainly wasn't Mr. Darius. It felt like something ancient, something trapped. I decided I couldn't take it any longer. I had to confront Mr. Darius. Maybe, just maybe, he knew something about what was going on. He had to, right? His house was the source of it all. There was no escaping it. But that decision, that small choice to step beyond the safety of my own home and walk into the unknown, was the moment everything began to unravel. It was late afternoon when I approached his house. The sun was beginning to dip behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the street. A cool breeze rustled the trees, and the air felt heavy with an odd stillness. I stood on the sidewalk in front of his house, looking at the old building in the fading light. The windows were dark, just like every other night, and the garden was even more overgrown than before. The smell of damp earth and decay seemed to seep out from the yard, thickening the air around me. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I was making a mistake, but the whispering wouldn't let me go. The curiosity, or maybe the terror, was consuming me. I had to know what was happening. I had to find the source of that voice. I walked up the path toward the front door, the gravel crunching under my feet. With each step, the feeling of unease grew. It wasn't just the house that unsettled me. It was the very air surrounding it. It felt as though the world had paused, holding its breath. As I reached the door, I raised my hand to knock, but before I could, the door creaked open just slightly. A shadow moved inside, and I heard the faint shuffle of feet. My heart raced. Was someone there? Or was it just the house settling again? I knocked anyway. The door creaked wider, and there stood Mr. Darius, his tall figure casting a long shadow in the dim light. He looked me over with those piercing eyes, his face expressionless, but there was something about the way he regarded me that made my stomach tighten. "Yes?" he asked, his voice low and raspy. I cleared my throat, trying to mask the nervousness in my voice. I've been hearing something at night. From your house. I was wondering if you might know what it is." He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me with that same unreadable expression. The silence between us stretched on, making me feel more exposed with every passing second. "What do you think you're hearing, Ethan?" he asked finally, his voice barely a whisper, though it sent a chill down my spine. I swallowed hard, unsure of how to explain it. "It's like a voice, a whispering voice. It comes from your house at night. It's not normal." Mr. Darius didn't react. He just stood there, staring at me, his eyes like cold, dark pools. It was as if he were considering whether to dismiss me or reveal something dangerous. Finally, He stepped back and motioned for me to come in. "Come inside then," he said quietly, his voice tinged with an odd calmness that made my skin crawl. "Let me show you." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to turn around and run. Something about the invitation felt wrong, like stepping deeper into something I couldn't comprehend. But the whisper, the voice, it was pulling me forward, compelling me to take that first step. I entered the house. It was darker inside than I had anticipated. The faint light filtering through the curtained windows cast long shadows across the floor. The walls were lined with old furniture, pieces that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. A thick layer of dust coated everything, and the air felt heavy, as if it hadn't been disturbed for years. It smelled like mildew and forgotten memories. The silence in the house was almost suffocating, broken only by the soft creak of the floorboards under my feet as I followed Mr. Darius through the hallway. He led me into the living room, where a fire crackled faintly in the hearth, though the room was still dim. The room felt like a time capsule, untouched by modernity, trapped in some forgotten era. It was then that I saw it, the thing that had been haunting my nights. At the far end of the room, on a small wooden table, sat the bone-white figure of a doll. It wasn't like any doll I had ever seen. It was made of wood, not cloth or porcelain, and its features were crude, almost grotesque. The eyes were large and hollow, staring out with a haunting emptiness. The doll's body was stiff and unnatural, its limbs rigid in a way that made it look like it was frozen in time. The hair, if it could even be called that, was just thin, dried twigs, strips of wood woven together haphazardly. I could feel my pulse quicken as I stared at it. The whispering grew louder, like 1,000 voices murmuring just behind my ears. I looked at Mr. Darius, hoping for an explanation, but he didn't seem to notice my growing discomfort. Instead, he moved toward the doll, his steps slow and deliberate. "This," he said softly, his voice distant, "is what you've been hearing." I stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "This doll, it's the source of the whisper." He nodded without looking at me, his eyes fixed on the doll. "Yes, it was made many years ago, by a child who never had the chance to grow up. This house, this place, it has a history. The whispers you hear are not just sounds. They're memories trapped in time, and this doll is the key. The voice you hear is hers." "Whose?" I asked, though I already knew what he meant. "Who is she?" Mr. Darius turned to face me, his face now an unreadable mask. "A girl. Her name was Lily. She lived here long before I did, and she died here." The air seemed to thicken as he spoke, his words hanging in the room like the smoke from the fire. "Lily was a special child. She created this doll, you see. She wanted to keep it safe, to protect it. But when tragedy struck, her soul became trapped. The doll was meant to hold a piece of her that never moved on." A cold shiver ran down my spine as the whispering grew more intense, as though it were coming from inside my own head now. Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached out and placed a hand on the doll. It was as if he were reconnecting with something long forgotten, something buried deep within the house. And then he spoke again, his voice lower than before. "Because," he said, "I've kept her here. And now she's calling you." My heart was pounding in my chest, and the room suddenly felt colder, much colder than it had before. The crackling fire in the hearth seemed like a distant echo now, far too weak to fight back the oppressive chill that was slowly crawling up my spine. The doll. Lily. I tried to make sense of it all, but my mind was a tangled mess of confusion and terror. What was happening? Why was Mr. Darius so calm about all of this? Why had he led me into this house, into this room and shown me the doll. The whispering hadn't stopped. It had only grown louder, more urgent, as though the voice was desperately trying to break free from the confines of the doll. My skin was crawling. I felt like I could barely breathe. I wanted to run, to tear myself away from this madness, but my feet were glued to the floor. It was as if the room itself was holding me in place, keeping me from escaping. The doll stared at me with those empty, hollow eyes. I could see the cracks in the wood now, the deep lines that seemed to tell a story, one of pain, of sorrow, of something lost. I could almost hear her, feel her presence, pressing against me like an invisible weight. I shook my head, trying to clear the thoughts that were swirling inside. This was insane. There had to be a logical explanation for all of this, right? I looked at Mr. Darius, desperate for some kind of reassurance. What do you mean she's calling me? My voice was barely a whisper, a trembling thing that didn't sound like my own. He didn't immediately respond. Instead, he reached down slowly and picked up the doll from the table. It was strange how light it felt in his hands, almost as if the doll itself had no weight, no substance. As he held it, the whispering seemed to intensify, the voice rising in pitch like a crescendo, pulling at my very soul. I could feel it inside me, crawling under my skin, begging for attention. I told you, Mr. Darius said softly, his voice almost tender. Lily's spirit was never at rest. She wanted her doll to protect her, but it became something else, something darker. And now, after all these years, she's calling to you because you're the one who can hear her. I took a step back, my feet stumbling as I moved away from the doll. What do you mean, I'm the one who can hear her? Why me? Why now? Mr. Darius's eyes never left the doll. He spoke slowly, as if carefully choosing his words. Because, Ethan, you're the one who's sensitive to what's been trapped in this house. You felt it, didn't you? The presence, the whispers. They've been calling to you since the moment you stepped into this town. And now the time has come. She's chosen you. The words hit me like a physical blow, and I staggered back, my hands pressing against the wall to steady myself. Chosen me, I repeated, my voice trembling. What are you talking about? I don't even know who she is. I've never met her. Mr. Darius turned his gaze to me, and for the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes, a glint of something almost sad. That's because you've never truly looked at her. You've never truly listened to the whispers. But now, she's reaching out to you, Ethan. She's calling, and it's only a matter of time before you're drawn in. The room seemed to close in around me. The walls felt like they were shifting, bending, like they were alive, like they were closing in on me. My heart raced. What was this? What was happening to me? The air was thick, suffocating, and the whispers were deafening now, rising and falling in a chaotic symphony of sound that filled every corner of the room. I can't do this, I gasped, my breath coming in shallow bursts. I don't understand. I just want to leave. But Mr. Darius wasn't finished. His face was calm, too calm, and his grip on the doll tightened as he continued to speak. You don't have a choice, Ethan. Lily has been waiting for someone to free her, for someone to help her move on. And now that someone is you. I shook my head violently, as if trying to dislodge the fear that was gnawing at me. No, I don't want anything to do with this. I don't care about Lily or this stupid doll. I just want to go home. But as I turned to leave, something stopped me. Something powerful, something that I couldn't see, but I could feel. My legs felt heavy, and I could feel a cold hand gripping my chest, constricting my breath. I stumbled forward, my hands reaching out to steady myself, but nothing was stable. It felt as if the room itself had come alive, bending around me, suffocating me. I turned to face Mr. Darius, my voice hoarse. "What's happening to me?" I croaked. "What's wrong with me?" For the first time since I had entered the house, Mr. Darius's face softened, as though pitying me. "You're starting to understand now. Lily's presence is inside you. She's awakening, Ethan, and there's no going back from this. You've opened the door, and she's invited you in. You'll never be free of her. She's part of you now." I backed away from him, my chest heaving. The whispers were deafening now. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. It felt like my mind was being pulled into a vortex, a spinning whirlwind of voices and images that I couldn't understand. I reached out, my hands trembling, grabbing at the walls, trying to find something to anchor myself to. But the walls felt like they were closing in, shifting and moving, and I could hear Lily's voice more clearly than ever before. Her voice was no longer a whisper. It was loud. It was demanding. "Help me." The voice seemed to plead. "Help me, free me." Terror shot through me like a bolt of lightning. I knew what she was asking now. I knew what Mr. Darius had meant. Lily wanted something from me, something that I wasn't prepared to give. But I didn't have a choice. I was already trapped. The doll was in my mind now, filling every corner of my thoughts, twisting and turning, until I couldn't distinguish between reality and nightmare. I could feel her inside me, clawing at my thoughts, pulling at my very soul. And then it happened. The room seemed to shudder, as though some great force had broken through a barrier, and the air grew thick with an unnatural energy. I could hear Lily's voice clearly now, not as a whisper, but as though she were standing right next to me. "Help me," she whispered again, but this time it wasn't a plea. It was a command. I tried to run, to escape, but my body wouldn't respond. My legs gave out beneath me, and I fell to the floor, my hands clutching at my head as the voices grew louder, more insistent. My eyes darted around the room, and for a fleeting moment, I saw someone, standing in the shadows, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. It was Lily. I couldn't see her clearly, but I knew it was her. The girl who had never been able to leave, whose spirit was now bound to the house, bound to me. I tried to scream, but the words wouldn't come. All I could hear was the deafening sound of her voice, echoing inside my mind, and then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went quiet. The room was still. The air was thick and heavy, and the doll was gone. I was alone, but in that silence, I knew one thing for certain: it wasn't over. The silence that followed was deafening. I was lying on the cold floor, my chest rising and falling with shallow breaths, my mind spinning, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. But it didn't make sense. None of it did. How had I ended up on the floor? Where had the doll gone? Why was it so quiet now? Was it really over? Or had something even worse begun? My body was trembling, as if I had just stepped out of an icy river and the cold had seeped into my bones. I could feel the weight of the silence pressing in on me, the oppressive air in the room, thick with something I couldn't explain. The voices, Lily's voice, were gone, but the feeling of her presence lingered, as though she was still in the room with me, watching, waiting. I slowly pushed myself up from the floor, my hands shaking as they gripped the edges of the wooden table for support. My legs were weak, unsteady beneath me, but I forced myself to stand, my eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. The shadows seemed deeper now, as though they were hiding something, someone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer alone. But the room was empty. I turned to face Mr. Darius, who was standing silently in the corner of the room, his hands clasped in front of him, watching me intently. His expression was unreadable, his eyes dark and distant. I had no idea what he was thinking, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't trust him. I couldn't trust anyone in this house. I didn't even trust myself. What the hell just happened? I finally managed to choke out, my voice raspy, barely above a whisper. Where did she go? What did you do to me? Mr. Darius's lips curled into a thin, almost imperceptible smile. It's not about what I did to you, Ethan, he said softly. It's about what you've allowed to happen. I took a step back, my body stiffening in sudden panic. What do you mean, allowed to happen? I don't understand. I don't understand any of this. I don't even know who Lily is. He didn't move, didn't flinch. His gaze never wavered, and it felt as though his eyes were piercing through me, into the very depths of my soul. You've already met her, he said, his voice low, almost soothing. She's been calling to you for a long time now. You heard her whispers, didn't you? You felt her presence in your house. She's inside you now, Ethan, and there's no turning back from this. I shook my head violently. No, that's not possible. You're lying. This is some kind of sick joke. You've been messing with my head, trying to make me believe in ghosts and spirits, and you don't understand, Mr. Darius interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp, like a knife cutting through the fog of my confusion. This isn't just some ghost story. This is real. Lily's spirit is bound to this house, and now it's bound to you. She's trapped, Ethan. Trapped in the doll, trapped in the walls of this house, and she needs you to set her free. But you don't understand the cost of that freedom. You don't understand what it will take. I was dizzy. My head was spinning, my vision blurring at the edges. I stumbled backward, my hands pressed to my temples, trying to block out the pounding in my skull. I don't want anything to do with this. I didn't ask for this. I don't want to be part of whatever sick game you're playing. Just leave me alone. But his words cut through my panic, their weight crashing into me like a tidal wave. It's too late for that, Ethan. You've already been chosen. You've already been marked. And now, the only way to break the cycle is to finish what was started. You have to help her. You have to help Lily move on. I took a deep, shuddering breath, my heart hammering in my chest. How do I help her? How do I make it stop? Mr. Darius stepped closer, his gaze never leaving mine. He was like a shadow, looming over me, and the air around him seemed to grow colder with every passing second. The only way to help her is to complete the ritual. You must do what she couldn't do before she died. You must release her from her torment. But you must understand, once you do this, there is no going back. You will be tied to her forever. I recoiled, my stomach turning. What do you mean, tied to her forever? What are you talking about? I don't care about your ritual. I just want out of here. He was silent for a long moment, and in the quiet, the whispering seemed to return. Soft at first, like the wind, but growing louder with every passing second. It was like 100 voices rising at once, each one overlapping the other, all of them speaking in a language I couldn't understand. The sound rattled my bones, making my knees weaken. I could hear it in my ears, in my mind, and my hands trembled as I clutched at the air, desperate to block it out. Mr. Darius didn't seem affected by the sound. Instead, he looked at me, his eyes colder than ever. You can't escape her, Ethan. The whispers, they're a warning. They're showing you the way. Lily is trapped in this house, and so are you. You've already been drawn in. I felt my throat tighten, like something was closing around my neck, and my eyes darted around the room, looking for something, anything, that could make sense of this nightmare. But nothing did. I was stuck in this place, this house, with Mr. Darius and a spirit I didn't understand. It was like I was losing myself in a maze I couldn't find my way out of. Please, I whispered, my voice cracking. Please tell me what to do. I need to get out of here." His eyes softened, just for a moment, before he spoke again, his voice low and dangerous. "The ritual, Ethan. You must find the heart of the house. You must find where Lily died. That is where the ritual begins. And once you start it, there's no turning back. But if you succeed, if you can release her, the whispers will stop. The house will be at peace. You will be free." "Where did she die?" I asked, my voice barely audible, the question slipping out before I could stop myself. I didn't want to ask it. I didn't want to know. But I had to. Mr. Darius's eyes flickered, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of something, regret maybe. But it was gone before I could make sense of it. "In the basement," he said quietly. "That's where it all started. That's where she was lost." The word basement hung in the air like a curse, and my stomach turned at the thought of descending into that place. Into the darkness where everything had begun, where Lily had died. But there was no choice. I had no choice. The whispers grew louder in my ears, and I could feel them closing in around me, clawing at my thoughts. Lily was waiting. She was always waiting. I could feel her presence, and I knew that if I didn't do something, if I didn't find the basement, find the heart of the house, she would consume me body and soul. I had to do it. I had to finish what was started. "Take me to the basement," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper, as I stepped away from Mr. Darius, my legs trembling beneath me. "Let's get this over with." Mr. Darius didn't respond right away. He simply turned and began walking toward the hallway, his pace slow, deliberate. The shadows seemed to swallow him up, and I hesitated for a moment, wondering if this was a mistake, if I was making a terrible choice. But I followed him. There was no turning back now. The hallway stretched out before me like a tunnel, long and narrow, its dark wood floors creaking beneath every step I took. I could feel the weight of the house pressing in on me, the oppressive silence around us growing more suffocating with each moment. The whispering had intensified again, but this time, it wasn't just Lily's voice that I could hear. It was a cacophony of voices, some familiar, some strange, echoing in my mind, blending together in a nightmarish chorus. They seemed to be urging me forward, telling me to keep going, to find the basement, to complete what had been set in motion all those years ago. I glanced to my side, where Mr. Darius walked, his presence so still, so calm, that it almost seemed unnatural. His face was unreadable, but there was something about his posture, something about the way he moved, that made him seem like he belonged here, in this house, like he was one with the darkness that hung in the air. I didn't understand him. I didn't understand why he had brought me here, why he had shown me the doll, why he had told me that I was the one who could set her free. It all felt like a twisted puzzle with missing pieces, and no matter how much I tried to fit them together, nothing made sense. Everything was warped, like a reflection in a broken mirror. "Why the basement?" I asked, my voice cracking as I tried to keep the fear out of it. "Why there? What happened to her?" Mr. Darius didn't respond immediately. He simply continued walking, his gaze fixed ahead, as if the question hadn't even been heard. I couldn't tell if he was ignoring me on purpose, or if he was simply lost in his thoughts. His silence was maddening, but I didn't press him further. I couldn't afford to. I was too consumed by the noise in my head, the growing sense of dread, and the overwhelming feeling that something was about to happen, something that would change everything. As we walked deeper into the house, the air grew colder. The floorboards creaked louder under my feet, and the shadows seemed to grow longer, stretching toward us, like reaching fingers desperate to pull us into the dark. The walls felt like they were closing in, and I had to fight the overwhelming urge to turn and run, to break free from the suffocating grip of this place. I reached out instinctively, grabbing the edge of the wall to steady myself, my fingers digging into the rough texture of the old plaster. The cold from the house seemed to seep through my skin, chilling me to the bone. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, pounding so loudly that it drowned out the whispering for a moment. My breath came in shallow gasps, and I had to force myself to keep moving forward, to stay close to Mr. Darius, to follow him into the unknown. At the end of the hallway, there was a door, a simple wooden door that looked no different from any of the others I had passed. But something about it felt different. The air around it seemed thick, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. I could almost taste the tension in the air, the sense of impending doom that hung like a fog in the hallway. Mr. Darius stopped in front of the door and turned to face me. His eyes were dark, unreadable, and I could see the faintest hint of something. Fear, maybe? Or was it resignation? I couldn't tell. "You must understand, Ethan," he said, his voice low and steady. "Once you step through that door, there's no going back. The house will know you. The spirits will know you. You'll be bound to this place, bound to Lily, and the ritual will begin." I felt my stomach twist at his words, but I didn't know what else to do. The choice had already been made. I had walked into this nightmare willingly, and now there was no escaping it. I nodded slowly, though I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to. "I understand," I lied. "Let's just get this over with." Mr. Darius's eyes lingered on me for a moment, but then he opened the door with a slow, deliberate motion, revealing the staircase that led down into the basement. The stairs were narrow, steep, and ancient, their worn wooden steps groaning under the weight of years of neglect. A cold draft surged up from the darkness below, and I instinctively stepped back, my heart racing in my chest. The whispering was louder now, echoing from the depths of the basement, mixing with the sounds of distant footsteps, rustling, the faint murmur of something moving in the dark. The voices were all around me, their tones rising and falling like waves crashing on a shore, each voice distinct but overlapping, forming a dissonant chorus that made my head spin. "Lily is waiting for you," Mr. Darius said quietly, his voice carrying a hint of something like reverence. "She's always been waiting, and now you'll meet her. You'll see the truth of what happened to her. But remember, Ethan, the ritual isn't just about freeing her. It's about what happens after. It's about the consequences." I swallowed hard, trying to push the growing knot of fear in my stomach aside. "What consequences?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound calm. Mr. Darius didn't answer. He just nodded toward the stairs, his eyes fixed on the dark abyss below. I knew there was no more time for questions, no more time for hesitation. The ritual had begun the moment I stepped into this house, and now it was pulling me toward the basement, toward whatever waited in the dark. I took a step forward, then another, and another, until I was standing at the top of the stairs. I could hear the soft rustling of something, someone down below, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness. It was as if the shadows themselves were alive, writhing and twisting, refusing to let me see what lay beyond. My breath caught in my throat as I took the first step down, the wood creaking under my weight. The sound echoed in the silence, each step sending a jolt of fear through me. I glanced over my shoulder at Mr. Darius, but he was still standing in the hallway, watching me with an unreadable expression. I couldn't tell if he was worried, if he was waiting for something to happen, or if he was simply a spectator in this twisted game. But I didn't have time to dwell on it. My attention was fixed on the darkness below, on the descent that would lead me deeper into the heart of the house. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, the temperature dropped even further, and I felt a sudden pressure in my chest, as though the air itself was thickening, compressing around me. The basement stretched out before me, dimly lit by a single flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The walls were covered in old, faded wallpaper that peeled away in places, exposing the rotting wood underneath. The air smelled stale, damp, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. It was a smell of decay, of forgotten memories, of things better left buried. The whispers grew louder, and I could feel them moving around me, pressing in from all sides, a cacophony of voices that sounded like they were right beside me. But when I turned, no one was there. I felt them in my bones, in my very blood, and they began to tug at my thoughts, at my sanity. I stepped farther into the basement, my footsteps echoing in the silence, and that's when I saw it. In the center of the room was a large, old-fashioned wooden chest. It was dark, almost black in the dim light, and it seemed to pulse with a faint energy, as if something inside it was alive, waiting to be released. The air around the chest seemed to hum with a low vibration, a sound that I could feel in the pit of my stomach. And then I saw it. A small wooden doll, lying on top of the chest, its eyes wide and lifeless, staring at me. Lily's doll. I felt a chill run down my spine, my breath catching in my throat. The doll was here, in the heart of the house, in the place where it had all begun. I knew, without a doubt, that whatever I did next would seal my fate. But I couldn't turn back now. The whispers had led me here. Lily had led me here. And now, I had no choice but to face whatever came next. I reached out toward the doll. The doll lay before me, its eyes wide and unblinking, staring into mine with an unsettling intensity. The air around it felt heavier, thick with an oppressive weight that settled deep in my chest. It was as if the house itself had a heartbeat, slow and deliberate, thumping beneath the floorboards. I could feel it in my bones, the pulse of something ancient, something dark, resonating through the room. The whispers in my ears grew louder, more distinct, yet still unrecognizable, a symphony of voices desperate for something I couldn't quite understand. I couldn't move. Not at first. I just stood there, frozen in place, my heart hammering in my chest, my mind swirling in confusion and dread. Everything felt distorted, like I was trapped in some kind of half-dream state, where nothing was real, and everything was slipping away from me. The shadows seemed to stretch, twisting around the walls, crawling toward me, as if they wanted to engulf me, to pull me into the same abyss that had swallowed Lily all those years ago. But I had come this far. There was no turning back. The weight of the house, of its secrets, its horrors, pressed down on me, and I knew that I had to finish what I had started. I had to complete the ritual, even if it meant losing myself in the process. I knelt down slowly, my legs weak beneath me, my hands trembling as I reached for the doll. It felt cold, unnaturally so, as though it had been submerged in ice for years. The wooden surface was smooth, but there was a strange, palpable energy that seemed to radiate from it, as though it had a life of its own. The moment my fingers brushed against it, the whispers around me surged, rising to a crescendo that rattled my skull. And then, as if responding to my touch, the doll's eyes seemed to shift, moving ever so slightly. It wasn't a physical movement, but a shift in perception, as though the doll had come to life in the most terrifying way. I pulled my hand back, my breath catching in my throat, but it was too late. A low, guttural whisper filled the room, and this time, I could understand it. Ethan. It was Lily's voice, or at least I thought it was. The voice was soft, almost melodic, but there was something so wrong about it. It wasn't a voice of comfort. It wasn't a voice of a child. It was the voice of someone who had been trapped, tortured, forgotten. Ethan, please help me. My skin crawled, and I felt a sickening knot form in my stomach. This wasn't just a spirit. This wasn't just a haunting. It was a plea, a desperate, desperate cry for release, for escape from the torment that had bound her to this place, to this cursed house. And I was the one she had chosen. I was the one she had marked. I wanted to get up. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't move. It was like the air around me had turned to concrete, heavy and immovable. My hands, still trembling, hovered above the doll once again, and I could feel the pull of something dark and powerful urging me to take it, to hold it. Something was waiting for me to finish what had been started. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to take hold of the doll again, the cold wood pressing into my palm. As soon as I touched it, the room seemed to shift. The walls blurred, the shadows deepened, and the light bulb above flickered violently, casting grotesque, distorted shapes across the basement. The temperature dropped even further, the chill seeping into my bones like ice water. I could see my breath in front of me, rising in small, misty clouds, but it wasn't the cold that made me shiver. It was the presence, the weight of something watching, something waiting. Then, everything went silent. The whispers stopped. The shadows stilled. Even the air seemed to hold its breath, as though the house itself was waiting for something to happen. And then, I heard it again. "Help me, Ethan." The voice was clearer now, sharper, and it came from all around me. It was no longer just in my head. It was real, coming from the very walls of the basement. I turned around frantically, looking for the source of the voice, but there was nothing there. No one. Just the doll, still clutched in my hands, and the oppressive darkness that filled the room. I could feel my pulse pounding in my throat. The fear had turned into something worse, something raw and primal. I knew I wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't alone in this house, in this basement, with this cursed ritual. The presence that had been haunting me, the presence that had been haunting Lily, was here. It had always been here. The floor beneath me groaned, and for a moment, I thought I felt the entire house shift. My vision swam, and I had to blink rapidly to keep from collapsing. But through the haze, I could see a figure emerging from the shadows, slowly and deliberately. It was a woman, a figure dressed in tattered clothes, her long, dark hair hanging loose around her face. Her features were blurred, indistinct, as though they were being obscured by the darkness itself. But what I could see, what I could make out, was enough to send a wave of terror crashing through me. Her eyes were wide, empty sockets where nothing but darkness stared back at me. And her mouth was open, but instead of words, a low, wailing scream poured from it, reverberating through the walls, shaking the very foundation of the house. It was a sound of anguish, of pure torment, and it pierced my very soul. I stumbled back, my legs giving out beneath me, and I collapsed onto the cold concrete floor. The doll slipped from my hands, clattering to the ground beside me. I could hear the scraping sound as it hit the floor, but it didn't feel real. Nothing felt real. The whole room had become a nightmare, a twisted dream that I couldn't wake from. The woman with the empty eyes was moving toward me, her hands reaching out, her fingers twitching as though they were beckoning me to come closer. The air around her was thick with an oppressive energy, and I could feel it pressing against me, pushing me back, threatening to crush me under its weight. But then, just as suddenly as she appeared, she stopped. She froze mid-step, her empty eyes locked onto mine. I could feel her gaze on me, and it was like nothing I had ever experienced. It wasn't just a look, it was an invasion, a breach into my very mind, as though she was digging through my thoughts, searching for something. Searching for what? A weakness? A fear? A way in? The whispers returned, louder now, 1,000 voices echoing through my mind. The words were clearer now, but still foreign. still twisted. But then, in the midst of the chaos, I heard something different. "Ethan." It was Lily's voice again, but this time it wasn't desperate. It wasn't pleading. It was calm, almost soothing, and it resonated deep within me, like a call to my very soul. "Help me finish it." The figure before me, the woman with the empty eyes, began to fade, her form blurring and twisting, as though she was being pulled back into the darkness from which she came. The room grew quieter, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly, but the tension remained, thick in the air, suffocating. I knew what I had to do. The ritual had to be completed. The voices, the presence, the horrors, they were all connected to the doll, to Lily, to what had happened in this house. And if I didn't finish it, if I didn't free her, I would never leave. I would be trapped here forever, just like her. I reached for the doll once again, my hand shaking as I picked it up from the floor. I could feel the energy radiating from it, a pulse that matched the beat of my own heart. There was no going back now. I had to finish it, and I would. The darkness was waiting. The doll felt heavier in my hands now, its cold, wooden surface pressing against my skin like an unforgiving weight. The silence in the basement had settled back in, but it wasn't the comforting stillness of an abandoned room. It was something else, something wrong. The kind of silence that holds its breath before something terrible happens. The kind of silence that wraps around you and squeezes until it hurts. I held the doll tightly, my fingers curling around its form, and my mind reeled with what I had just witnessed. The woman with the empty eyes, her scream still echoed in my thoughts, reverberating like a painful hum that wouldn't go away. The darkness around me seemed to thicken again, pressing in from all sides, and I realized with a sickening certainty that the house wasn't just haunted, it was alive. Not in the way that people speak of haunted houses, with creaking floors and strange noises, but in a far darker sense. This place was alive with something older than death itself. Something that fed on fear. Something that used people like me to accomplish its endless, twisted purpose. I could feel it in my veins now. The house was inside me, coiling around my very soul. I had been marked the moment I stepped inside, just as Mr. Darius had warned me. But what he hadn't told me was how it would feel, how the very foundation of my existence would tremble under the weight of it, how it would break me down piece by piece. I glanced up from the doll, still holding it tightly, and found my gaze locked on the same dark corner of the room where the woman had appeared. She was gone now, vanished into the abyss, but I could still feel her presence lingering in the air. It was as though she was waiting for me to take the final step, to release her from her torment, to fulfill the promises that had been made so long ago. But I wasn't sure I was ready for that. I wasn't sure I could face the truth of what had happened here. I glanced back down at the doll. It seemed innocuous enough, small, wooden, with glass eyes that stared at me unblinking. But there was something in its expression, something twisted, that made me question everything I thought I knew. I could feel its weight more and more with each passing second, the pressure of what it represented suffocating me. And then, the whispers returned. They had been silent for a brief moment, but now they swirled around me again, more frantic than before. The voices were a blur, overlapping, frantic, but I could make out a single word among them. Remember. It was Lily's voice. It was unmistakable. The whisper wasn't just in my ears. It was in my mind, like a spark igniting a memory that had been buried too deep to recall. I could feel something within me stirring, as if something long forgotten was slowly rising to the surface. The memories, they were all coming back now. I didn't want to remember. I didn't want to face what had happened here. But I had no choice. The house wasn't going to let me leave until I understood everything. until I saw the truth. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, and when I opened them again, everything had changed. The basement had vanished. I was no longer standing in the dim, decrepit room. The walls were gone, replaced by the harsh brightness of fluorescent lights above. I was no longer holding the doll, but a small, trembling figure, a little girl who couldn't have been older than 7 or 8. She was staring up at me with wide, frightened eyes, her clothes ragged and torn, her hair tangled and wild. Her hands were bound, and her lips were sealed with something that looked like duct tape. I felt a sharp pang in my chest, and before I could fully process what I was seeing, the memories flooded back. This was Lily. I recognized her from the blurry photographs in the old, forgotten albums I had seen in Mr. Darius's house. I recognized her from the stories I had heard about the girl who had disappeared in the house, the one who had been lost and never found. But that was the lie, the story that had been told to hide the truth. Lily had never disappeared. She had been kept here. She had been trapped, just like I was now. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. I could only stare into the terrified face of the girl who had been abandoned, neglected, and twisted by the same forces that had claimed this house. The same forces that had now claimed me. The little girl, Lily, let out a soft, strangled sound, and I saw her lips quiver beneath the duct tape. Her wide, panicked eyes never left mine. She was pleading with me. She was begging me to understand, to help her. But the words wouldn't come. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't even reach out to her. And then the vision shifted again. The basement returned in a blur, the doll once more in my hands, but something was different. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed more alive, twisting and writhing like a mass of hungry serpents. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay, and the oppressive silence that had hung around me before now felt like a living, breathing entity. The whispers were louder now, maddening, filling every inch of my skull. I could feel the presence of something, the house maybe, or the spirit of Lily, pressing in on me from all sides, squeezing the air from my lungs, tightening its grip around my chest. The truth was there. I could feel it. I could see it in the cracks of the walls, in the flickering light above, in the very air that surrounded me. The house was alive, but not in the way I had thought. Lily had never been a victim here. She had been a vessel. The voices were no longer just whispers. They had turned into screams, horrific, desperate screams that sounded like they came from 1,000 souls, trapped in a prison of endless torment. The house had become their prison, their sanctuary, and they had used Lily to keep them there, to bind them to this place. But it wasn't just about the spirits. It was about something far worse. The house had always been hungry. The realization hit me like a tidal wave, crashing over me with brutal force. The doll. It was a key. Not just to the spirits, not just to Lily's tragic fate, but to the house itself. The ritual was not about releasing the spirits. It was about feeding them, about giving them a vessel, a conduit. And I had been chosen to complete it. I had been chosen to finish what had been started. Lily's voice came to me again, this time loud and clear. Help me. Ethan, finish it. The ground beneath me seemed to tremble, the walls closing in as the room swayed around me. I could hear the doll's faint whisper, a voice so quiet it almost felt like it was part of my thoughts. The darkness was rising. The ritual was nearing completion, and I knew without a doubt that there was only one way out. I had to finish it. I had to free Lily, but not in the way I had thought. I wasn't setting her free. I was giving her what she needed to complete the cycle. I looked down at the doll, my fingers trembling as I gripped it tightly once again. And for the first time, I understood. The ritual wasn't just about freeing the souls trapped in the house. It was about feeding them. It was about ensuring the house would remain alive. And in order for that to happen, I had to offer myself as the final piece, the last sacrifice. But what choice did I have? The house was waiting, and I was the key. As I stepped forward, my heart racing, the whispers grew louder. The walls seemed to close in around me, and I realized that there was no escape. The darkness had claimed me. The darkness had claimed us all, and the ritual had begun. The house was suffocating, its very walls pressing in on me like a heavy weight, pushing me toward the inevitable. I could feel it now, more than ever, the pulse, the heartbeat of the place. It was alive, thrumming beneath the floorboards, vibrating through the air, through my very bones. The whispers surrounded me, louder now, deafening, as if the house itself was talking to me, beckoning me to join it, to become one with its dark purpose. My fingers still clutched the doll, its wooden form now slick with sweat from my trembling hands. The weight of it was unbearable, and I could feel its eyes on me, those glassy, empty eyes that had once seemed so innocent, but now were full of something far darker. I could hear Lily's voice again, more desperate this time, more demanding. It was clear now what I had to do. The truth had finally revealed itself in full, and it was not the kind of truth you could walk away from. The house had been feeding on the souls of the lost for generations, and I had been the final offering, the last piece of the puzzle that would ensure its insatiable hunger would never be sated. I wasn't going to save Lily. I wasn't going to free her. I was going to give her what she needed. I was going to give the house what it wanted. The ritual wasn't about release. It was about feeding, about continuing the endless cycle of torment that had been going on for decades. And I, Ethan, was the final sacrifice. Ethan, the voice called again, a soft, mournful whisper that pierced through my skull. The doll seemed to thrum with a life of its own, vibrating in my hands as though it were a living thing. The darkness around me grew thicker, curling around the corners of the basement, pooling into shapes that seemed to flicker and shift like shadows of people long gone. The walls groaned, as if the house was stretching and shifting, pulling itself tighter, drawing me further into its grasp. I knew what I had to do. The ritual had begun long before I stepped into this house. Long before I even knew about Lily, about the tragedy that had befallen her. This house had been waiting for someone like me, someone who was foolish enough to try and uncover its secrets, someone who, like Mr. Darius, would become a part of its dark history. But unlike Mr. Darius, I wouldn't just be another lost soul trapped within its walls. I would become part of its very essence, the last piece to complete the cycle. The doll in my hands began to feel warm. Its surface, once cold and unyielding, now pulsed with a heat that was almost painful. It was as though the spirits in the house were feeding off of my fear, my terror, my desperate need to escape. They were feeding off my soul, and the more I resisted, the stronger their grip became. I could see Lily again, but this time, she wasn't a frightened little girl. She was standing before me, her face blank, her eyes dark and hollow. She was no longer the innocent child trapped by the house. She was something more, something that had been twisted by the horrors of this place. She was not a victim anymore. She was part of the house now, just like everything else. Her voice, no longer soft and pleading, echoed in my mind, cold and detached. Ethan, you are the key. You were always meant to be the one. Her lips didn't move, but the words poured into my ears, into my soul. You were the one who would complete the ritual, the one who would set the house free. The weight of her words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. There was no escape from this. No escape from the house, from the ritual, from the curse that had trapped all of us in this endless loop. The house didn't just want the souls of its victims. It wanted to feed on them forever, to use them to sustain its insatiable hunger. It had always been this way. Always. I stumbled back, my legs shaking beneath me as the reality of it all crashed down on me. My hands, still gripping the doll, began to tremble violently. The room around me blurred, and for a moment, I thought I saw faces emerging from the shadows, faces twisted in agony, their eyes wide with terror, their mouths open in silent screams. The house was watching me. The house was waiting for me to finish it. Finish it, Lily's voice echoed again, now a command, no longer a plea. I could feel the darkness around me pressing in, growing heavier, more suffocating. The walls, the shadows, the very air itself seemed to come alive, responding to my fear, to my hesitation. It was all a part of the ritual. It was all part of the trap I had walked into. And I knew deep down that there was no escaping it. The whispers rose to a crescendo, filling my mind, drowning out everything else. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked at the doll, the one thing that had been the catalyst for everything. The one thing that had connected me to this house, to its dark, twisted history. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't run. The house had me. It had always had me. And now, I had to finish it. The ritual had to be completed. With a final, resigned breath, I lifted the doll high above my head, feeling the weight of it, the heat radiating from it. The shadows in the room writhed, the air thick with anticipation. The house was ready. I was ready, and there was nothing left to do but follow through. I raised the doll higher, my hand trembling with the force of the weight in my palm. For a brief moment, I thought of everything I had lost, everything I had hoped for, the life I had before all this. But those thoughts were fleeting, gone in an instant as the house surged forward, its hunger palpable. It would devour everything in its path. The moment the doll left my hands, a pulse of energy shot through the room, a violent wave that shook the very foundation of the house. The shadows twisted and writhed in agony, as if they were being pulled into something deeper, darker. The doll hovered for a split second, suspended in the air, before crashing to the ground with a deafening thud. The moment it hit the floor, the entire house seemed to collapse inward. The walls groaned, the floors cracked, and the air itself seemed to burn with an unbearable heat. It was like the house was tearing itself apart from the inside, the weight of the ritual's completion too much for it to contain. And then, in the midst of the chaos, I heard it. Lily's voice, clearer than ever, echoing in my mind. "Thank you, Ethan." But this time, there was no sadness in her voice. No fear. Only an eerie calm. An acceptance. And as the house around me began to crumble, as the shadows and whispers turned into screams of pure torment, I realized with a sickening clarity that I had done exactly what it wanted. I had set it free. The house was no longer bound by the spirits of the lost. It was free to consume, to continue its endless hunger. But in doing so, it had become something worse. It had become a void, a hollow shell, sucking everything into itself. And there would be no end to it. As the walls collapsed around me, as the air grew thick with the stench of burning wood and decaying flesh, I saw the faces of all the lost souls. They were trapped here, just as I was, trapped in the house, feeding its insatiable hunger. And now I would join them. The last thing I heard before the darkness consumed me was Lily's voice, whispering one last time, "You were always the final piece, Ethan. The house will never be the same without you." And then everything went black. The house is still there, though no one dares to go near it. Its windows are shattered, its doors hanging loosely on their hinges, and the air around it is thick with the stench of decay. The neighbors speak of it in hushed tones, afraid to even look in its direction. They say the house is cursed. They say it feeds on the souls of those who dare enter. But no one truly knows the truth. No one knows what happened to Ethan, and no one dares ask, because the whispers are still there, and they will never stop. As the story comes to an end, I invite you to take a moment and breathe deeply, letting the calmness settle into your body and mind. The mystery of the house, the secrets of Ethan's journey, may linger in the corners of your thoughts. But now it's time to let the quiet embrace of the night carry you into a peaceful slumber. Remember, sometimes the darkest stories can lead us to the most peaceful rest. Let go of the tension, let the whispers of the story fade away, and let your dreams unfold without fear as the night wraps around you like a comforting blanket. Before you drift off, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think happened to Ethan? What part of the story stood out to you the most? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'm curious to know how you felt during this journey, and if the house's secrets have left you wondering, just as they did with Ethan. Sleep well, let the night bring you peace, and until next time, may your dreams be calm and your heart be light. Sweet dreams.